Did you ever see a video that, by the end, you realize that you should have called it all along? I mean, in retrospect, it just seemed so obvious. This is one of those videos, and at least it isn't one of the trolls who are just poing what they hope is a gullible audience. But it is just as sad. So strap in, grab your favorite beverage, and come along because this is going to get bumpy. One last time to finish off this PsychonautWispy video, and he goes completely off the deep end. I mean, I guess we should have expected it, but I was actually surprised by the end of this rambling mess, and suddenly it all makes complete sense. So here we go with his fifth meandering, completely random complaint about atheism, that thing that he doesn't understand at all. This gets pretty painfully bad, so I'm kind of sorry in advance for your suffering.
Anyway, getting off track here. So now my point number 5 is again that it ignores the subjectivity of experience, right?
But as I said before, the subjectivity of experience is entirely irrelevant. What you're ignoring is the irrationality of the human mind and human interpretation of the data, because that's a huge part of what's going on in the religious mindset. They want there to be a God, so they see absolutely everything as confirmation that a God exists. That's why you get so many theists going, "Look at the trees!" Okay, it's a tree, so what? What does that actually tell you? It has no inherent meaning whatsoever. It's just your interpretation that is pushing this confirmation bias of your pre-existing beliefs, not the evidence at hand. This is why it is so important to excise subjectivity from any rational evaluation of the facts. Subjectivity only gets in the way. What you think, what you feel, it doesn't mean a thing. How you get to those conclusions, though, that absolutely does. So let's at least pretend to be rational, shall we?
And this kind of goes back to what I was saying about meaning as well. But humans' experiences really are subjective, right? This is actually very apparent if you look at situations where people are in a very violent circumstance, okay?
Sure, we can look at that too. And you know what happens in a lot of violent or otherwise life-threatening situations? People get things wrong. People see things that aren't there and interpret the situation in ways that do not match the evidence. The brain is not very good at keeping facts straight in the midst of a traumatic experience. It's too busy trying to survive. And if these experiences go on for any length of time, it can result in some completely bizarre reactions. It's why things like Stockholm Syndrome exists. You can be held hostage and abused and still start to identify with your captors because your brain is looking for some way, any way, to escape from the situation. So it constructs its own reality to protect you from what's actually going on. You're not being tortured, you actually deserve it. It's for your own good. This is what is now normal, so that you don't have a psychotic break with reality and lose your ever-loving mind. This is why we don't rely on subjective experiences to determine what happens in traumatic or life-threatening situations. The human brain simply isn't that reliable.
Or a really horrifying circumstance, if they're in some kind of a shooting or some kind of a situation where their life is on the line. People see things differently in that circumstance, right? People will say that different amounts of shots were fired, or, something else happened, right?
Yes, and you just made my point for me. There was one and only one reality to the situation. People interpreted what happened differently, meaning that their subjective experiences are near universally wrong. They didn't each live through completely different, mutually contradictory things. There was a single common event, and each and every one of their brains handled that event differently. It interpreted the data differently. So once again, you're just wrong.
Right? If you talk to the people at the Twin Towers, they all have different descriptions of what happened, and it's really universal across the board, right?
That is true. But that doesn't change the reality of space and time. Time passes at a specific rate no matter how we might subjectively interpret it. I mean, unless you're moving at a significant portion of the speed of light, but I don't think you're doing that. We know that in accidents, people will describe events as if they happened in extreme slow motion. But that doesn't mean that time actually slowed down for that person. It is a trick of the mind, not a change of reality. Yet the religious in particular seem to trust their faculties and not the facts. It's why so many of them take the supposed near-death experiences seriously, even though science knows exactly what's really going on in their heads. The brain takes a core dump to deal with the expected rush of new experiences, and they take that as seeing dead loved ones in tunnels of light. All of this gets run through their religious filter to find out what it means, when it actually doesn't mean anything. The personal interpretation suddenly means more than the factual reality. It's also why these experiences change depending on the part of the world that you're in or the beliefs that you hold. It's only Christians and those exposed to the Christian worldview who see Christian iconography. It's kind of funny how that works, huh?
When people are in that particular panicked state of mind, they perceive the world differently.
Yes and no, which is why science doesn't rely solely on human interpretation of the data, but on the data itself. We can't see into the microwave or into the infrared or ultraviolet, but those things still exist whether we can experience them directly or not. If we did what PsychonautWispy here suggested, then reality to us would only exist between 390 and 750 nanometers of light because that's all our eyes can see. No sounds would exist outside of the range of 20 to 20,000 hertz because we couldn't hear them. Our reality would exist in a bubble no larger than 3 miles in diameter because that's as far as our eyes can see at any one time. Yet we know that all of that is nonsense because reality demonstrably exists beyond those limitations. Reality didn't just magically change when Hans Lippershey invented the telescope. The world didn't change when Zacharias Janssen invented the microscope. We just learned that reality extended beyond our senses. It's not all about us, folks.
And that kind of goes back to Einstein's theory of relativity, right? And that our understanding of space and time is relative to where we are in space and time, right? And this kind of goes even further back to videos I've posted years and years ago about, the dimensionality of the world and how as three-dimensional creatures we are perceiving the world, right? We cannot fully perceive or fully see in 3 dimensions, but our understanding of the world is based on where we are in it, right? And that kind of also goes to the next level of it as well. Perhaps a 4th-dimensional creature would have a far better understanding of things. It could understand the laws and the rules of our world around us far better than we can because we are immersed in a 3-dimensional world, right?
Except, we're not. You do know that time is a 4th dimension, right? We are 4-dimensional creatures. We experience time and the 3 dimensions of space. It might be quibbling, but it just had to be said. Wispy here has no clue what the hell he's talking about. And I'm not really surprised by that, are you?
So, I guess those are just some of the five main issues that I have with it. And I've been in some discussions with people, and I consider myself a pretty religious person. I'm a Christian. I believe that God created the world and Jesus came back to save me from my sins, but that doesn't mean that I think that anybody who doesn't believe in him is damned, right?
Then you're not really much of a Christian, are you? At least not as most people interpret Christianity. Because this is exactly what the Bible says. 1 John 5:11-12 says, "And this is the testimony. God has given us eternal life, and this life is in his Son. He who has the Son has life. He who does not have the Son of God does not have life." John 14:16 reads, "Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And that's pretty convincing proof that, at least according to the Bible, the unconverted and the unconvinced will never go to heaven, and thus, by definition, are damned. Now, granted, people can and often do just ignore the parts of the Bible that they don't like. After all, pretty much every theist on the planet does that to one degree or another, which just means that you're not really taking your own theology very seriously. And you claim to have problems with us. Seriously, look in the mirror, Wispy.
I think that is quite a stigma of Christianity and of religion as a whole, and this kind of goes back to the religious negativity bias, is they assume that every religion basically says if you don't believe what we believe, then you're damned to eternal hell, right?
A lot of religions do exactly that. Of course, there are plenty of them, some sects of Christianity included, that don't just believe that you're damned, they just make sure that you are by murdering you. Now, it's true that most religious murders these days are committed by the Muslims, but it doesn't take much effort at all to find murders committed in the name of Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, and others. It's just that most theists conform to the largely secular societies that they live in, and disposing of heretics isn't typically permitted. It's why secular societies are so important. Otherwise, you end up with crazy theocracies that condone widespread religious murder. And that tends to be bad for societal stability.
I kind of go more, I believe it's agnostic on that, which is I don't know, right? I don't know if, why would God have created the world and then, damned 3/4 of the population just because they didn't believe it, or even more, whatever percentage of the population.
Why would you think that there's a God responsible at all? I mean, honestly, that's the question that really needs to be asked. Why do you think that? Where did you get your information, and how have you objectively tested it to see if it stands up to the light of critical scrutiny? Because we can just make assertions like that for just about anything. Why would invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies do whatever they do? Well, who the hell says that they did? You'd have to be pretty nutty to think that they exist in the first place, just like you'd have to be pretty nutty to think that there are any gods. Without solid, objectively defensible evidence that these things actually exist in the real world, and not only exist at all, but exist as believers think that they do, you have absolutely no credible reason whatsoever to think that you're right at all. So why in the world do you?
But I kind of also go to a quote by, I believe, Dalai Lama on this, and I'm just going to paraphrase him. And he says that we need to stick to our own cultures, right? It's not so much about just abandoning all of your ideas and then going to one particular belief system. It's kind of about staying with the people that you've been raised with and staying with the culture that you've been raised with. It's not about just throwing everything out the door and just going to one particular set of ideas.
Oh, good. He's even more nutty than I thought. Because here's the reality, whether that word has any meaning to you or not. There are facts, demonstrable, objectively testable, intellectually discoverable facts, things that leave evidence that we can examine and test for objectively. These things are real, whether you like it or not. Anything else, that's kinda up in the air, if it's not absolutely ludicrous on its face. Rational, intelligent people, we accept the things for which there is evidence. We don't just cast around for anything that makes us feel good. We care if the things that wind up in our heads are factually correct and intellectually defensible. And you, unfortunately, You do not. You're certainly not alone in that. The majority of the planet, in fact, believes things for emotional, not intellectual reasons, but you are still irrational in your faith. I suspect you just don't care, and I really don't care that you don't care, but you're still wrong. The time to believe any proposition is when it has been objectively demonstrated to be true, and not one instant before. You're jumping the gun, Wispy. Knock it off.
But, another thing too is that I don't find a whole lot of peace in the idea that there is just eternal black in death, right?
And who cares what you feel? I mean, honestly, who gives a damn? This is really where he rolls right off the rails into Stupidville. It's as stupid as saying, well, I don't get a lot of peace out of believing that I don't have $1 trillion in my bank account. So, I do. Whether your beliefs give you any peace at all or not, that says nothing about the objective reality of the situation. Your feelings simply do not impact the real world one bit. It doesn't matter if you want to die and snuff out like a candle. Every single shred of evidence that we have, it shows that's exactly what happens. It doesn't matter if you really hate the idea of falling like a stone and splattering onto the ground when you jump off a tall building. It's still what you do if that's what you're going to do. All the faith in the world doesn't make you magically sprout wings. That's not how anything works.
If anything, psychedelic substances have shown me that.
Yeah, that's really not much of a surprise. Newsflash for you, Wispy. You've broken your brain. You have undergone willing brain damage. It's no wonder you're as messed up as you are.
But it really makes them so upset. They get so upset when anybody says anything about there being a higher world, because people can't. The only reason they're mad about it is because it can't be proven with science and it can't be observed with our 5 physical senses.
Or anything else. I'm starting to understand the plant. I mean, he's probably smoking it between videos. And this is about the point that any and all credibility for this guy went straight out the window. It's all about emotions and frying your brain and misinterpreting reality because it makes you feel good. And suddenly, all of that is our fault because not only does he not comprehend atheism, or let's be honest, much of anything else, he just doesn't care. I mean, who here is surprised by any of this? Can I get a show of hands?
But I mean, just look at all the things that are happening that we can't even perceive of, right? Like we have all these different pieces of equipment that can detect the invisible wavelengths of light, the different colors of light that we can't actually see in the world around us. And like the radio waves, right? And the fact that sounds are wavelengths, but we can't perceive that they are wavelengths. And so we have these systems that are set up, right? There's all these spectrums that are going on around us, right? I kind of go back to Alan Watts again there. The world is composed of a whole bunch of different spectrums, right? We have 5 senses to detect what we have around us, but that does not mean that we can detect all of it, right? From the gamma rays to the sun, to even the quantum world, right?
I already made that point. When I was completely disproving your nonsense about subjective experiences. Reality is bigger than you are, Wispy. It's not all about you. In fact, in the grand scheme of things, you are entirely irrelevant. We all are. Nobody cares how you feel or what you experience or any of that, really. It's about what is actually real, not about how you interpret your experiences. The problem here isn't us, Wispy. It's you. It's all you. Figure it out.
There is far so much happening around us that we do not have a immediate perception of.
So, what was that drivel you were saying about subjectivity again? Because it sounds like, on some level, even you realize that it doesn't actually matter. Your feelings and your experiences are not indicative of what is actually going on. Somewhere in that pathetic little drug-addled mind of yours, you realize that you're completely wrong, but you don't want to admit it because it gets in the way of your feelings. So you know you're mistaken, and you just don't give a damn. That's pathetically sad.
We just have tools that could be very flawed in nature that are kind of making sense of the world around us.
And your evidence for that is what? Or is this just one more thing that you yanked out of your asshole because it makes you feel comforted? Honestly, the more I watch these religious numbnuts, the less impressed I get by their supposed thought processes, if there really are any to speak of. There is something very, very, very wrong going on upstairs in the mind of the theist. Now, for some of them, like Wispy here, I think we can explain it, but for many others, I think there's some kind of deeper malfunction going on. I don't know. What is your take on their biological or emotional defects? Let me know what you think in the comments.
And so to say that there isn't something greater, there isn't some kind of something that is outside of this reality, is almost to ignore the fact that we know so little about the world around us, and that we have so little of a perception of what is happening. We are very, very limited, right?
Yes, we are. But that doesn't mean that you just get to make things up that are entirely unsupported by any evidence of any kind, just because it fills some emotional desire in your tiny little adult brain. Because you notice that the religious, even hippy-dippy idiots like Wispy here, they tend to get offended when somebody suggests that their gods aren't the real gods. Someone else's god has to be correct. You know, it's funny that he makes the claim that we don't know what's out there, and largely he is right in that. But then he wants to tell us that there's a god of some kind out there. And how the hell does he know that? Really, we need to see your evidence, because we only start believing in these things that we can't see when we've found a way to test them and measure them and demonstrate them and show that they're real. As I've said before, the time to believe a proposition is when it can be demonstrated, and not 1 second before. If someone had decided in the 1500s that DNA existed without having the slightest idea how to demonstrate it, their claims, even if it turned out to be 100% accurate, they would have been irrational to make. Claims and beliefs are not justified without evidence. Just saying, well, I could be right, that means nothing. You could also be wrong, and without evidence, you are much more likely to be wrong than if you just happened to luck out and got your bizarre assertions right. Nobody cares what you believe. Nobody cares what you have faith in. Nobody cares what you want to be true. We care what you can prove. And you can't prove a goddamn thing. Goddamn, Wispy. Get to work!
So, yeah, that is all for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I would encourage you all to go ahead and get in on this discussion if you have anything to add. I know that generally psychonauts tend to be spiritual people. You don't necessarily have to be religious, but I mean, psychonautics basically is the act of exploring different states of consciousness, whether it be through lucid dreaming, through hallucinogenic drug use, through conscious breathing, through meditation, right?
Through damaging the only means that you have of evaluating reality on its own terms, which, sure, makes you spiritual because you've scarred your gray matter and fucked up your brain. It's people who don't actually understand anything that's actually going on, and apparently, they just don't care. So while you're at it, yeah, why don't you just stick a railroad spike in your ear and see how that makes you feel? Now, don't actually do that because, you know, doing that is stupid. But if you're just looking for random experiences, go for broke, right? What can it hurt? Yeah, don't answer that.
And so generally, I like to think that psychonauts have more of a, they're a little bit more in tune than the average layman with their spirit.
No, they're just completely out of tune with reality. And that's kind of the problem. Dumb people are dumb.
And I find it hard to believe that a large part of the psychonautic culture would fall under the branch of atheism. So maybe I'm just preaching to the choir here. But anyway, peace and love, guys. I'll see you on the next video.
No, you've just attracted a lot of atheists, and if you look at your comments, they're not agreeing with you. And of course, this is just yet another theist who doesn't understand how to hit reply and respond to his detractors. Now, maybe he's just too wasted to make his fingers work, I don't know. But regardless, I think we all know why this was such a meandering mess in the first place. Because PsychonautWispy here is a complete mess. I realize in retrospect that, I could have cut out a lot of his video, but it was more fun just watching him dig his own hole than willingly lie down in it. That's really half the entertainment value of the religious, because they're so utterly clueless about what's going on. The fastest way for a rational person to get out of religion is to study religion and the religious. The more you look at these people, the more ridiculous they get. But they're all ridiculous for the exact same reason, aren't they? You will never find a theist who believes for any reason other than delusion or emotion. It's the generic explanation for all of religion. And that's what makes all of this so pathetically sad. It's all so easily demonstrated and simply explained. And they just don't get it. And then they complain when we keep pointing it out. That's even more sad in and of itself, isn't it?
Bum